were built with the use of forced labor. Launch sites, edit. For a description of the V-2 launch equipment and procedure, see Mailer Away Gen. After the Operation Crossbow bombing, initial plans for launching from the massive underground Watton, Wisens and Sotivest bunkers or from fixed pads such as near the Chateau du Molay were dismissed in favor of mobile launching. 8 main storage dumps were planned and 4 had been completed by July 1944. The one at Mirasois was begun during August 1943 and completed by February 1944. The missile could be launched practically anywhere, roads running through forests being a particular favorite. The system was so mobile and small that only one Mailer Away Gen was ever caught in action by Allied aircraft. During the Operation Bodenplatte attack on the 1st of January 1945 near Lochem by a USAF 4th Fighter Group aircraft, although Raymond Baxter described flying over a site during a launch and his wingman firing at the missile without hitting it. It was estimated that a sustained rate of 350 V-2s could be launched per week, with 100 per day at maximum effort, given sufficient supply of the rockets. Operational history, edit. The LXV Amica ZBV formed during the last days of November 1943 in France, commanded by General d'Artillerie ZV Erich Heinemann, was responsible for the operational use of V-2. 3 launch battalions were formed in late 1943, Artillery Abteilung 836, Mo. Grossborn, Artillery Abteilung 485, Mo. Norgard, and Artillery Abteilung 962, Mo. Combat operations commenced in September 1944, when Training Battery 444 deployed. On the 2nd of September 1944, the SS Waffe Abteilung 500 was formed, and by October, the SS under the command of SS Lieutenant Gen Hans Kammler, took operational control of all units. He formed Gruppsud with Art. Apt. 836, Merzig, and Grupp Nord with Art. Apt. 485 and Battery 444, Bergsteinfurt and The Hague. After Hitler's 29th of August 1944 declaration to begin V-2 attacks as soon as possible, the offensive began on the 7th of September 1944 when 2 were launched at Paris, which the Allies had liberated less than 2 weeks earlier, but both crashed soon after launch. On the 8th of September a single rocket was launched at Paris, which caused modest damage near Porte d'Italie. 2 more launches by the 485th followed, including one from The Hague against London on the same day at 6:43 p.m. The first landed at Staveley Road, Chiswick, killing 63-year-old Mrs. Ada Harrison, 3-year-old Rosemary Clark, and sapper Bernard Browning on leave from the Royal Engineers, and one that hit Epping with no casualties. The British government, concerned about spreading panic or giving away vital intelligence to German forces, initially attempted to conceal the cause of the explosions by making no official announcement, and euphemistically blaming them on defective gas mains. The public did not believe this explanation and therefore began referring to the V-2s as flying gas mains. The Germans themselves finally announced the V-2 on the 8th of November 1944, and only then, on the 10th of November 1944, did Winston Churchill inform Parliament, and the world, that England had been under rocket attack for the last few weeks. In September 1944, control of the V-2 mission was transferred to the Waffen-SS and Division ZV. Positions of the German launch units changed a number of times. For example, Artillery Unit 444 arrived in the southwest Netherlands, in Zeeland, in September 1944. From a field near the village of Saruskirk, 5 V-2s were launched on the 15th and the 16th of September, with one more successful and one failed launch on the 18th. That same date, a transport carrying a missile took a wrong turn and ended up in Sarooskirk itself, giving a villager the opportunity to surreptitiously take some photographs of the weapon. These were smuggled to London by the Dutch resistance. After that the unit moved to the woods near Ridges, Gasteland in the northwest Netherlands, to ensure that the technology was not captured by the Allies. From Gasteland V-2s were launched against Ipswich and Norwich from the 25th of September, London being out of range. Because of their inaccuracy, these V-2s did not hit their target cities. Soon after that only London and Antwerp remained as designated targets as ordered by Adolf Hitler himself, Antwerp being targeted in the period of 12 to the 20th of October, after which time the unit moved to The Hague. Targets, edit. During the succeeding months about 3,172 V-2 rockets were fired at the following targets. 1 Belgium, 1,664, Antwerp, 1,610, Liege, 27, Hasselt, 13, Tournai, 9, Mons, 3, Diest, 2. 2 United Kingdom, 1,402, London, 1,358, Norwich, 43, Ipswich, 1. 3 France, 76, Lille, 25, Paris, 22, Tourcoing, 19, Arras, 6, Cambrai, 4. 4 Netherlands, 19, Maastricht, 19. 5 Germany, 11, Remagen, 11. Antwerp, Belgium was a target for a large number of V-weapon attacks from October 1944 through to the virtual end of the war in March 1945, leaving 1,736 dead and 4,500 injured in Greater Antwerp. Thousands of buildings were damaged or destroyed as the city was struck by 590 direct hits. The largest loss of life by a single rocket attack during the war came on the 16th of December, 1944, when the roof of the crowded Cine Rex was struck, leaving 567 dead and 291 injured. An estimated 2,754 civilians were killed in London by V-2 attacks with another 6,523 injured, which is 2 people killed per V-2 rocket. However, this understates the potential of the V-2, since many rockets were misdirected and exploded harmlessly. Accuracy increased during the war, particularly for batteries where the late Strahl radio guide beam system was used. Missile strikes that hit targets could cause large numbers of deaths. 160 were killed and 108 seriously injured in one explosion at 12:26 p.m. on the 25th of November, 1944, at a Woolworths department store in New Cross, southeast London. British intelligence sent false reports via their double-cross system implying that the rockets were overshooting their London target by 10 to 20 miles, 16 to 32 kilometers. This tactic worked. More than half of the V-2s aimed at London landed outside the London civil defence region. Most landed on less heavily populated areas in Kent due to erroneous recalibration. For the remainder of the war, British intelligence maintained the ruse by repeatedly sending bogus reports implying that the rockets were now striking the British capital with heavy loss of life. Possible use during Operation Bodenplatte, edit. At least one V-2 missile on a mobile Mail Away-Gen launch trailer was observed being elevated to launch position by a USAF 4th Fighter Group pilot defending against the massive New Year's Day 1945 Operation Bodenplatte strike by the Luftwaffe over the northern German attack route near the town of Lochum on the 1st of January, 1945. Possibly, from the potential sighting of the American fighter by the missile's launch crew, the rocket was quickly lowered from a near launch-ready 85 degrees elevation to 30 degrees. Tactical use on German target, edit. After the U.S. Army captured the Ludendorff Bridge during the Battle of Remagen on the 7th of March, 1945, the Germans were desperate to destroy it. On the 17th of March, 1945, they fired 11 V-2 missiles at the bridge, their first use against a tactical target and the only time they were fired on a German target during the war. They could not employ the more accurate late Strahl device because it was oriented towards Antwerp and could not be easily adjusted for another target. Fired from near Hellendoorn, the Netherlands, one of the missiles landed as far away as Cologne, 40 miles, 64 kilometers, to the north, while one missed the bridge by only 500 to 800 yards, 460 to 730 m. They also struck the town of Remagen, destroying a number of buildings and killing at least 6 American soldiers. Final use, edit. The final 2 rockets exploded on the 27th of March, 1945. One of these was the last V-2 to kill a British civilian and the final civilian casualty of the war on British soil, Ivy Millia Hamp, aged 34. Killed in her home in Kynaston Road, Orpington in Kent. A scientific reconstruction performed in 2010 demonstrated that the V-2 creates a crater 20 meters, 66 feet, wide and 8 meters, 26 feet, deep, ejecting approximately 3,000 tons of material into the air. Countermeasures, edit. Main articles, Operation Crossbow and Project Big Ben. Big Ben and Operation Crossbow, edit. Unlike the V-1, the V-2's speed and trajectory made it practically invulnerable to anti-aircraft guns and fighters, as it dropped from an altitude of 110 km, 62-68 mi, at up to 3 times the speed of sound at sea level, approximately 3,550 km per hour, 2,206 miles per hour. Nevertheless, the threat of what was then codenamed Big Ben was great enough that efforts were made to seek countermeasures. The situation was similar to the pre-war concerns about manned bombers and resulted in a similar solution, the formation of the Crossbow Committee, to collect, examine and develop countermeasures. Early on, it was believed that the V-2 employed some form of radio guidance, a belief that persisted in spite of several rockets being examined without discovering anything like a radio receiver. This resulted in efforts to jam this non-existent guidance system as early as September 1944, using both ground and air-based jammers flying over the UK. In October, a group had been sent to jam the missiles during launch. By December it was clear these systems were not having any obvious effect, and jamming efforts ended. Anti-aircraft gun system, proposed, edit. General Frederick Alfred Pyle, commander of Anti-Aircraft Command, studied the problem and proposed that enough anti-aircraft guns were available to produce a barrage of fire in the rocket's path, but only if provided with a reasonable prediction of the trajectory. The first estimates suggested that 320,000 shells would have to be fired for each rocket. About 2% of these were expected to fall back to the ground, almost 90 tons of rounds, which would cause far more damage than the missile. At the 25th of August, 1944 meeting of the Crossbow Committee, the concept was rejected. Pyle continued studying the problem and returned with a proposal to fire only 150 shells at a single rocket, with those shells using a new fuse that would greatly reduce the number that fell back to Earth unexploded. Some low-level analysis suggested that this would be successful against 1 in 50 rockets, provided that accurate trajectories were forwarded to the gunners in time. Work on this basic concept continued and developed into a plan to deploy a large number of guns in Hyde Park that were provided with pre-configured firing data for 2.5-mile, 4.0-kilometer grids of the London area. After the trajectory was determined, the guns would aim and fire between 60 and 500 rounds. At a crossbow meeting on the 15th of January, 1945, Pyle's updated plan was presented with some strong advocacy from Roderick Hill and Charles Drummond Ellis. However, the committee suggested that a test not be performed as no technique for tracking the missiles with sufficient accuracy had yet been developed. By March this had changed significantly, with 81% of incoming missiles correctly allotted to the grid square each fell into, or the one beside it. At the 26th of March meeting, Pyle was directed to a subcommittee with R.V. Jones and Ellis to further develop the statistics. 3 days later the team returned a report stating that if the guns fired 2,000 rounds at a missile there was a 1 in 60 chance of shooting it down. Plans for an operational test began, but as Pyle later put it, Monty beat us to it, as the attacks ended with the Allied capture of their launching areas. With the Germans no longer in control of any part of the continent that could be used as a launching site capable of striking London, they began targeting Antwerp. Plans were made to move the Pyle system to protect that city, but the war ended before anything could be done. Direct attack and disinformation, edit. The only effective defenses against the V-2 campaign were to destroy the launch infrastructure, expensive in terms of bomber resources and casualties, or to cause the Germans to aim at the wrong place by disinformation. The British were able to convince the Germans to direct V-1s and V-2s aimed at London to less populated areas east of the city. This was done by sending deceptive reports on the sites hit and damage caused via the German espionage network in Britain, which was secretly controlled by the British, the double-cross system. According to the BBC television presenter Raymond Baxter, who served with the RAF during the war, in February 1945 his squadron was performing a mission against a V-2 launch site, when they saw one missile being launched. One member of Baxter's squadron opened fire on it, without effect. On the 3rd of March, 1945, the Allies attempted to destroy V-2s and launching equipment in the Hague-SPOS in The Hague by a large-scale bombardment, but due to navigational errors the Bezuidenhout quarter was destroyed, killing 511 Dutch civilians. Assessment, edit. The German V-weapons, V-1 and V-2, cost the equivalent of about $500 million. Given the relatively smaller size of the German economy, this represented an industrial effort equivalent to but slightly less than that of the US Manhattan Project that produced the atomic bomb. 6,048 V-2s were built, at a cost of approximately £100,000. $2,370,000 in 2011, each, 3,225 were launched. SS General Hans Kammler, who as an engineer had constructed several concentration camps including Auschwitz, had a reputation for brutality and had originated the idea of using concentration camp prisoners as slave laborers for the rocket program. More people died manufacturing the V-2 than were killed by its deployment. The V-2 consumed a third of Germany's fuel alcohol production and major portions of other critical technologies. To distill the fuel alcohol for one V-2 launch required 30 tons of potatoes at a time when food was becoming scarce. Due to a lack of explosives, some warheads were simply filled with concrete, using the kinetic energy alone for destruction, and sometimes the warhead contained photographic propaganda of German citizens who had died in Allied bombings. The psychological effect of the V-2 was considerable, as the V-2, traveling faster than the speed of sound, gave no warning before impact, unlike bombing planes or the V-1 flying bomb, which made a characteristic buzzing sound. There was no effective defense and no risk of pilot or crew casualties. An example of the impression it made is in the reaction of American pilot and future nuclear strategist and congressional aide William Liscum Borden, who in November 1944, while returning from a nighttime air mission over Holland, saw a V-2 in flight on its way to strike London. It resembled a meteor, streaming red sparks and whizzing past us as though the aircraft were motionless. I became convinced that it was only a matter of time until rockets would expose the United States to direct, transoceanic attack. With the war all but lost, regardless of the factory output of conventional weapons, the Nazis resorted to V-weapons as a tenuous last hope to influence the war militarily, hence Antwerp as V-2 target, as an extension of their desire to punish their foes and most importantly to give hope to their sympathizers with their miracle weapon. The V-2 did not affect the outcome of the war, but it resulted in the development of the intercontinental ballistic missiles of the Cold War, which were also used for space exploration. Unfulfilled plans, edit. A submarine towed launch platform was tested successfully, making it the prototype for submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The project code name was Prüfstand 12, Test Stand 12, sometimes termed the rocket U-boat. If deployed, it would have allowed a U-boat to launch V-2 missiles against United States cities, though only with considerable effort and limited effect. Hitler, in July 1944, and Speer, in January 1945, made speeches alluding to the scheme, though Germany did not possess the capability to fulfill these threats. These schemes were met by the Americans with Operation Teardrop. While interned after the war by the British at Kstik Camp 11, Dornberger was recorded saying that he had begged the Führer to stop the V-weapon propaganda, because nothing more could be expected from 1 ton of explosive. To this Hitler had replied that Dornberger might not expect more, but he, Hitler, certainly did. According to decrypted messages from the Japanese embassy in Germany, 12 dismantled V-2 rockets were shipped to Japan. These left Bordeaux in August 1944 on the transport U-boats U-219 and U-195, which reached Jakarta in December 1944. A civilian V-2 expert was a passenger on U-234, bound for Japan in May 1945 when the war ended in Europe. The fate of these V-2 rockets is unknown. Post-war use, edit. At the end of the war, a competition began between the United States and the USSR to retrieve as many V-2 rockets and staff as possible. 300 rail carloads of V-2s and parts were captured and shipped to the United States, and 126 of the principal designers, including Wernher von Braun and Walter Dornberger, were captives of the Americans. Von Braun, his brother Magnus von Braun, and 7 others decided to surrender to the United States military, Operation Paperclip, to ensure they were not captured by the advancing Soviets or shot dead by the Nazis to prevent their capture. After the Nazi defeat, German engineers were relocated to the United States, the USSR, France and the United Kingdom, where they further developed the V-2 rocket for military and civilian purposes. The V-2 rocket also laid the foundation for the liquid fuel missiles and space launchers used later. United States, edit. Main article, V-2 sounding rocket. Operation Paperclip recruited German engineers, and Special Mission V-2 transported the captured V-2 parts to the United States. At the close of the Second World War, more than 300 rail cars filled with V-2 engines, fuselages, propellant tanks, gyroscopes, and associated equipment were brought to the rail yards in Las Cruces, New Mexico, so they could be placed on trucks and driven to the White Sands Proving Grounds, also in New Mexico. In addition to V-2 hardware, the U.S. government delivered German mechanization equations for the V-2 guidance, navigation, and control systems, as well as for advanced development concept vehicles, to U.S. defense contractors for analysis. During the 1950s, some of these documents were useful to U.S. contractors in developing direction cosine matrix transformations and other inertial navigation architecture concepts that were applied to early U.S. programs, such as the Atlas and Minuteman guidance systems as well as the Navy's SUBS inertial navigation system. A committee was formed with military and civilian scientists to review payload proposals for the reassembled V-2 rockets. By January 1946, the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps invited civilian scientists and engineers to participate in developing a space research program using the V-2. The committee was initially named the V-2 Rocket Panel, then the V-2 Upper Atmosphere Research Panel, and finally the Upper Atmosphere Rocket Research Panel. This resulted in an eclectic array of experiments that flew on V-2s and helped prepare for American manned space exploration. Devices were sent aloft to sample the air at all levels to determine atmospheric pressures and to see what gases were present. Other instruments measured the level of cosmic radiation. Only 68% of the V-2 trials were considered successful. A supposed V-2 launched on the 29th of May, 1947 landed near Juarez, Mexico and was actually a Hermes B-1 vehicle. The U.S. Navy attempted to launch a German V-2 rocket at sea. One test launch from the aircraft carrier USS Midway was performed on the 6th of September, 1947 as part of the Navy's Operation Sandy. The test launch was a partial success. The V-2 went off the pad but splashed down in the ocean only some 10 kilometers, 6 mi, from the carrier. The launch setup on the Midway's deck is notable in that it used fold-away arms to prevent the missile from falling over. The arms pulled away just after the engine ignited, releasing the missile. The setup may look similar to the R-7 semi-Orca launch procedure, but in the case of the R-7 the trusses hold the full weight of the rocket, rather than just reacting to side forces. The PGM-11 Redstone rocket is a direct descendant of the V-2. USSR, edit. Main article, Soviet Space Program. See also, German influence on the Soviet space program. The USSR also captured a number of V-2s and staff, letting them stay in Germany for a time. The first work contracts were signed in the middle of 1945. During October 1946, as part of Operation Ozhovikhim, they were obliged to relocate to Branch 1 of NII-88 on Gorodom-Lya Island in Lake Silija, where Helmut Grottrup directed a group of 150 engineers. In October 1947, a group of German scientists supported the USSR in launching rebuilt V-2s in Kapustin. The German team was indirectly overseen by Sergei Korolev, one of the leaders of the Soviet rocketry program. The first Soviet missile was the R-1, a duplicate of the V-2 manufactured completely in the USSR, which was launched first during October 1948. From 1947 until the end of 1950, the German team elaborated concepts and improvements for extended payload and range for the projects G1, G2 and G4. The German team had to remain on Gorodom-Lya Island until as late as 1952 and 1953. In parallel, Soviet work emphasized larger missiles, the R-2 and R-5, based on further developing the V-2 technology with using ideas of the German concept studies. Details of Soviet achievements were unknown to the German team and completely underestimated by Western intelligence until, in November 1957, The satellite Sputnik 1 was launched successfully to orbit by the Sputnik rocket based on R-7, the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile. During the autumn of 1945, the group directed by M. Tikhon Ravavke and N. G. Chernyshov at the NII-4 Rocket Artillery Institute of the USSR Academy of Sciences developed on their own initiative the first stratospheric rocket project. Project VR-190 planned for vertical flight of 2 pilots to an altitude of 200 kilometers using captured German V-2 rockets. France, edit.